Okay, so this lecture video is centered on something called hydrated blocks. And hydrated blocks is a way for you to build a Flutter application that can save data to and from local storage for data that, so for the mobile app, it's saving it to the local device. For the website, it's saving it as basically like cookies on the website. And you want to be able to do this so that when you have data that you want to perhaps preserve on the local machine after fetching it from a remote site, you want to be able to keep it locally and then possibly refresh it only when the data that has been stored locally is rather old or um, uh, has expired. So this is an app here that measures basically getting the weather from a remote site and displaying that weather in a UI here like this. And this, so what you need to do first is you take a very simple kind of application, very simple Flutter application, and you add these kind of components. And the one that's specifically that you need for sure is called Hydrated blocks. And this works in conjunction with Flutter block. And Flutter block is just a way for us to be able to arrange the Flutter application in an architecture centered around blocks, which is then centered around certain events, and then getting a certain state, and then displaying that data within a UI. Okay.
Subscribe to my channel.
So the way that this particular Flutter storage technology works is it works in conjunction with Flutter block, and it saves data in whenever the emit function is used with blocks. So one thing is to review the video that I have on using Flutter block, but let me give you a quick rundown on Flutter block. So when the app runs, and then we enter in a city name that we want to look up the weather for. Once we enter the city name and we press enter, you will see here that when we submit a city name to do a searching, let me get past this quickly and go back to the main. So when we search for a city, we're going to add this Flutter block event called get weather. And we come back over here in the get weather event. You can see it defined here, get weather. And then we execute this function on get weather. And down here on get weather, we see it executing first, loading it's just a state that we're going to load the weather. So we need to tell the UI that our state is that we're loading the weather. And then once we loaded the weather, we're going to emit this function of weather loaded. So there's two places that we do this. One time is when we found something within our cache, our in-memory cache. The other time is when we didn't find it in our cache, and then we fetch it from the remote server. So we're using here a weather API to get it from a remote server, the weather data. And then once we add it to our in-memory cache, then we call emit weather loaded again with this new weather. So this is, so whenever the emit gets called, what happens is that this function here, right, storing data back to storage. So this function of toJSON gets called every single time the emit function gets called. And we only really want to care only when we've we've fetched a new weather data. So what we do here is we are looking at the state, say, okay, we are handling when the weather data got loaded. We look into our cache. We want to see whether the weather data is there. And if it's there, first of all, what we do is we load up the entire current cache with the weather, and then we will add the new weather there, data there, and then we will then set the last weather that we found. So we mark that as well. And then here you can see that we return a result to this function. And we're returning this data type, which is city name and some data structure. And what Hydrated BLoC does in this case is it then takes this data structure and saves it the to the persistent storage on either the mobile device or on the website. So this is, again, how we're using hydrated blocks. And that's, again, how I highlighted here at the very beginning of the video that we are using this hydrated block. And whenever we are, so when the app first loads or comes up and loads, um, we're going to call this function, which is from JSON. And from JSON gets called when we are loading it back from the persistent storage back into memory. And here in this case, we are loading all the cached, the whole set of cities and weather data with it, and we're putting it back into our memory cache. And then we're then using that. So if we were to uh, shut down this app and restart it, we'll put a breakpoint here, say run, debug. There we go. So this is what the hydrated block is doing. This is getting called, and it's getting this item from the local storage. And it has the cached memory, the cached weather of two cities, and then the last city that we had just searched. And if we then, okay, so we do this, and we say continue. And this one here is just saying, okay, the weather is loaded, so we're going to look through this and return the storage back. We're storing the data back to storage, okay? And this is just what it's doing here because it's handling the weather loaded state, even though the data hasn't changed. So the way that we set this up is that in the initial setup of the block, normally, if you're not dealing with hydrated block, but just regular blocks, this would just be block like this. But since we're dealing with hydrated blocks, we're using this definition of hydrated block, and it's saying we're handling the events, and then this is the data type that we're dealing with. And then you can see that we are specifically overriding these from JSON and to JSON with that same data type as defined here, so that hydrated block can load or restore. So either load or store back the data back to local storage. Okay. So this is a good, very simple example of using hydrated blocks with Flutter. And this UI is just a simple UI to show this. All right.